Okay, good morning. I'm Marijtje Jongsma. I'm an associate professor at the Behavioral Science Institute of the Radbound University in Nijmegen, the Netherlands. My background, I studied neuropsychology at the Radbound University, and after my studies I spent 1 year in Australia, and then I came back to do my PhD, actually at the Radbound University Medical Center, the Department of Anesthesiology. And at that time it was to study by means of the EEG, so the human electroencephalogram, how much brain processing, information processing is still going on during anesthesia. So it had a lot of questions about consciousness. After that I became a lecturer and I did many different research projects, but pretty much all of them using the EEG, so the human electroencephalogram. With that I studied rhythm perception, pharmacological effects in rat EEG, cerebral palsy in children, music perception, I had that one, learning, pain, and currently also anxiety and trauma. Actually, really since my master degree. So when I studied neuropsychology, I really aimed to become a clinical neuropsychologist. And when I started my internship, I very quickly realized that it did not have really my passion. And strangely enough, when I was still a master's student, I was really not looking forward to do my thesis research. I really thought, you know, it's really obligatory and I don't like it. But actually that was the thing that turned out that I really liked. So I kept being fascinated by research ever since and changed career path. Haha, that is a really nice question. So we did this experiment of processing pain in a social context. And we actually did it because for a long time I actually have more educational tasks than research tasks. And this was actually in the context of one of my courses, the EEG and event-related potential course. So I did this research project with a group of students, all from the research master in cognitive neuroscience. It was a group with, I think, 8 different nationalities. And we were invited by a museum in the Netherlands, a science museum, to actually give a demonstration during an all-night festival. So once a year this museum has festivals with DJs, VJs, and a lot of people visiting with an interest in science, but they also show things about science and even an experiment. We went to Amsterdam, we collected data the full night for 1 night, and then we went back home. Now, because it needed to be attractive for the audience, I tried to make it or link it to an experiment that is well known and is interesting but also fascinating for the audience. So we based our experiment on the very old Milgram experiment. You have probably heard about it. It's notorious, but I'm always surprised that many people also outside psychology or academia actually have heard about the Milgram experiments. There's TV documentaries and films made about it. Now, in the Milgram experiment, they're very unethical. What they did was tell people actually to give shocks in increasing order to a deadly doses to another person, but just to see how far people would go in listening to a researcher to harm somebody else. Now, we know now that these are unethical, but we wanted to make a similar setup, not to study the obedience or to see how far people would go, but really to study, does it differ if you hurt yourself or hurt somebody else? And does it matter if you're being hurt by yourself or if you're being hurt by somebody else? And we did this also with the EEG in a festival with 20 students. So I think quite spectacular. So you say, okay, you did the experiment in one night. Of course, that was data collection. Still, it took us 2 years to publish, like any kind of regular research, yeah? Because after that, you really have to process the data, etc. How we did the research? We had 4 conditions, but before that, people would come in. They had to wait anyway, and we were surprised that at the festival, so many people were keen on joining. I think they were thrill-seeking, so they were even willing to wait for an hour and a half to participate in the experiment. It was crazy, just to, get electric shocks, safe electric shocks. When they were waiting, we had them fill out some questionnaires, and what we had them fill out was, first of all, their pain sensitivity, but also their amount of empathy, so the ERI. And we also checked psychopathic traits. Now, people always are a little bit shocked when they hear about psychopathic traits, but as any kind of traits, there's a normal distribution in society. And if you score high, it doesn't mean that you're a psychopath, but it means that maybe you're less empathetic, maybe you're a bit more easy in making decisions, etc. So a certain amount is always there. After they filled out the questionnaires, we actually gave them the electric shock to see if they were okay with it. So this was the ethical part. So you say, okay, it's set to a standard level, we stick it on your arm, and you have control, but if it's too intense, we don't care, you stop the experiment. So, and because it's a very short shock, and because it's harmless, it's just very short, it's really like, ouch, but it doesn't really harm you. And then people have a laugh because it's also immediately over. There's no after pain. So people like to join. After we checked them in, we put on 3 EEG electrodes over the midline and then controlled for eye movements, and we had a reference. So 5 EEG electrodes in total and a ground, so 6. And this is where we had all the students for, because they were very quick and they worked in teams of 2 or 3 students, preparing every participant that wanted to join. Now, we didn't have 1 participant in the EEG, but 2 at the same time. So participant 0 would be attached to the pain stimulator with a button, looking at the screen. Participant 1 would be sitting next to this person, also looking at the screen, but not attached to the pain stimulator. They both had EEG. Now, the first person is asked, press the button, and after the button is pressed, 1 second later, you see a flashlight, and 1 second later, you will get this shock. So it would go, press button, flashlight, Now the person sitting next to this person would see the process, would see the button press, would see the flashlight, also giving an event-related potential in this person, and then see the reaction on the pain. Yeah. We did this 5 times. Then the button was moved to the person sitting next to you. Yeah? Now this person had to press the button 5 times. Now you can also measure an event-related potential if you press a button. And this person now had to press the button 5 times, giving a shock to person number 1. And they didn't like that. Yeah? It's really if you press a button and then 1 second later, flash, puff. Yeah? That doesn't really feel like you should be doing it. Next, this person that had first been observing would now be the pain participant, also start to hurt him or herself 5 times and then being hurt 4 or 5 times. So we have 4 conditions, 2 conditions just watching or inflicting pain, and 2 conditions getting pain, first by yourself, then by somebody else. So although it's very short, you get in total there's 20 trials, 5 watching pain, 5 giving pain, 5 giving yourself pain, 5 getting pain. So the whole experiment lasts less than a minute. This is how we could do 60 participants in a night. Yeah, So the ERP is the event-related potential. And the ERP we can actually get from the ongoing EEG. And this is why we gave the shock 5 times in each condition, because the EEG is just an ongoing regular line with a lot of random waves in it. And if you have several trials and you average only activity that is in time locked to the moment that you give the shock, or see the flashlight or press the button, that will remain visible and the random noise will be averaged out. So the way to get the event-related potential is just average over your trials within a condition. And if we look at the ERN, that's the event-related negativity, it is the same as the event-related potential, but we measure it mostly when people give a response. So it's when they press the button. And the event-related or the error-related negativity occurs normally when somebody makes a mistake. So for example, if I give you a 2-choice reaction task with a good answer and a wrong answer, if you give the wrong answer already, very often you know it, oh no, I made a mistake. And then we see in the button press already more negativity in the wave. Now we thought if you press the button to give somebody else a shock, maybe there's also an error-related negativity because it feels like making an error. You know, we're all being told you shouldn't hurt other people. And we were curious if we could see this effect also back in the EEG. So we compared, because this is why we had the 4 conditions, which is nice, because we have one condition where you give yourself pain, but also before that, the condition where you give somebody else pain. And these button presses we compared. Now, giving the button press that results in shocking somebody else does give indeed a more visible error-related negativity. What is interesting is that, and this is far more difficult, because then the group, 60 sounds like a very large group, especially if you measure them all in one night. But to do correlations is a little bit more challenging. But we did find a correlation, and that was with the questionnaires for psychopathic traits and this error-related negativity. So in general, the difference between hurting yourself or somebody else did not really differ that much if people scored high on the psychopathic traits. So they were more indifferent. You know, I'm doing the experiment, I press the button, whether it's for myself, whether it's for you. Yeah, although they know it is harmless, they know that the person actually volunteered to get the shocks, and they know they will be getting the shocks themselves as well. And the interesting thing, so I wouldn't really call it psychopathic or high psychopathy per se, but it's also more rational behavior. And the funny thing is, this is exactly what we also see in medical professionals. That's other research. If you compare, for example, pain empathy in medical doctors, and you compare it to laymen, then doctors learned to sort of shut off their pain empathy because they have to act upon it. The ethical approval was not that difficult because we always left the participants in full control. Yeah, and it is harmless. We know it's not invasive, and you cannot really do any damage with this shock. It's also not directly from the electricity, of course it works with batteries. So it's safe. Then again, participants were in full control because they first were able to feel the shock and still determine whether to participate or not. So they really knew what was going to happen. So sometimes you're not telling the real purpose of the experiment. That's also an ethical threat. Here we were very transparent. The final thing is participants, they signed of course an informed consent, but it was also explicitly specified you can stop at any time you want. So if you say after 2 shocks, okay, this is enough for me, you stop. Also, if you would feel uncomfortable with pressing the button, giving a shock to somebody else, you would still see it. We didn't have any problems that night, so all participants were quite happy to participate. I think there was one that after feeling the shock said no. And of course, as always with pain experiments, I try to keep a close eye on the participants. I train the students this way, see if they're at all times comfortable, look at their behavior, keep things really comfortable for the participants. Yes, and this is actually one of the worries of this kind of experiments as well. Because I've done quite a few pain experiments and I'm always surprised that it attracts a lot of volunteers. And because if I tell that I do pain research, then people would respond, oh, I would never be a participant in your research. But every time I set up an experiment, they're lining up to wait for it. So this has always amazed me. But there's actually one very interesting other study of a group of the University of Maastricht that looked into this phenomenon and actually discovered that most people that volunteer for pain experiments are not the average population. They are different in their pain attitudes, and like you said, they're actually a little bit more thrill-seeking. So you should really be careful with drawing conclusions for the general population if you do pain experiments, because what you're measuring is actually a specific part of the population that is really eager and quickly to raise their hands to participate. But in the end, and also if I ask students, people are interested in pain as a phenomenon because it's something that we all know. Yeah? We all know what pain is, we've all experienced it, and at the same time, we can never really put a finger on it. So I think it's a fascinating topic for pretty much everybody, which also helps to the motivation of participating. Yeah, I think the final result was also a correlation with the pain empathy. And this was also what surprised me a little bit more than the psychopathic traits, is that people that have a very high score on empathy and show that they are empathic, they showed it most by giving an incredible increase in the pain response when they inflicted pain to themselves. And apparently our pain empathy is primarily directed to ourselves. They felt so they had definitely a very strong response there. Also, when giving pain to yourself compared by if you are being given pain by somebody else, we respond less if the pain is delivered by somebody else. We don't care as much. We care more if we inflict pain to ourselves. Maybe you have this experience if you have to remove a splinter. You rather have somebody else do it because hurting yourself is actually quite difficult, but this effect increases with high empathy. Take-home message or how this can apply it. I think it's just a very nice demonstration of a research methodology that you can use to illustrate to the general audience on the festival. So that was our main aim, to have a very nice display of how this kind of research works, normally at the university, but now at the festival. So there was a lot of general education going on. At the same time, it is fascinating to see how pain attitudes and pain empathy and psychopathic traits all affect our tendencies, not only in behavior, but also reflected in our brain reactions with respect to hurting ourselves, hurting others, and feeling our pain. And our pain experience is most maximal if we hurt ourselves and if we are high in empathy. With pain research, you're doing similar experiments also in a festival, because if you consider the latter, I would really say do it. It's great fun, especially to go there with students, the sense of team science, like really doing it together, and going to the max as a team was still one of the best experiences I had in research. The other thing with pain research, as in any kind of research, have a real curiosity and a real interest. Know what kind of research is out there. There's many interesting and fascinating papers. Plan your experiment well in advance. Get a lot of constructive feedback and consider to pre-register your study. So before you start collecting your data, already submit it, increasing your chances for your publication to be accepted.
Lead and innovate.